What if I told you that the fear shaping your life isn't really fear of death itself, but fear of what you've been told death means? From the moment you were old enough to understand the word die, you were given images, stories, and rules. Maybe it was a dark void, maybe heaven, maybe hell, maybe just nothing. But rarely did anyone say, "We don't know, let's find out together." Instead, the story of death was handed to you fully formed, and you were expected to believe it without question. That story became a silent force behind your choices. You chase success as if time is running out. You try to make your mark before you disappear. You avoid the difficult truths that might disrupt your comfort because something in you is scared it will all vanish anyway. You attach tightly to people, to identities, to roles, not just out of love or passion, but out of an unconscious urgency to matter before the curtain falls. And all of this, every choice you make, every fear you carry, has been quietly influenced by one unquestioned assumption: that death is the end. But, is it? You've been living with a silent pressure in the background. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it whispers, it hides behind ambition, it dresses up as responsibility, it cloaks itself in logic. But beneath it all is the haunting belief that your time is limited, your awareness is fragile, and that one day, everything you are will vanish into silence. And so you act as if life is a race, as if you must grasp, achieve, impress, and control before the final moment comes. But the fear behind that mindset is not based on truth, it's based on a story, a very specific story you were conditioned to accept. Religion told you there's a judgment. Science told you you're just neurons and chemicals. Culture told you to distract yourself from the question altogether, but none of them showed you. They asked you to believe, but not to explore, to accept, but not to feel. And yet, deep within you, there's always been a pull, a strange and subtle knowing that the end isn't really the end. That death is not a wall, it's a veil. If you've ever stood beside someone taking their final breath, you've felt it. That moment when the body falls still but the room is still full. That moment when something you can't quite name shifts, as if something left not outward, but inward. You didn't see it with your eyes, but you sensed it. And in that moment, you knew death isn't what you were taught. It's not a full stop, it's a comma. So ask yourself, what if you've been living your life shaped by a lie? What if death isn't the opposite of life, but just the end of a chapter? What if the deepest fear that's been driving your choices was never even yours to begin with? And more importantly, what would your life look like if you no longer feared the end? What if I told you that the one thing you fear the most is something you can never actually experience? Think about it. You've known pain, silence, sleep, even unconsciousness. But you have never, not once, experienced the absence of experience itself. You may believe that death is nothingness, a great void, a blackout that lasts forever. But here's the paradox. To imagine nothing, you must be there to imagine it. The mind tries to paint it as blackness, but blackness is still a color. The mind tries to call it silence, but silence is still heard by something. No matter what you imagine, you are still in the picture. Even in the most extreme states of non-awareness, like deep sleep without dreams, or going under anesthesia, there is no memory of the gap itself. You don't experience unconsciousness, you return from it. You say, "I was out," or "I don't remember anything," but even that requires a thread of continuity. There is an I who returns, who noticed that time passed, who still is. If true non-being were possible, wouldn't you have tasted even a drop of it by now? Try to recall a moment when you were completely not there, not asleep, not unaware. But truly not, you can't. The very act of trying proves the point. Awareness is always present, even if it disappears from content. Even when you think you've lost it, you haven't. It simply slips into the background, waiting. So what does that mean for death? You've been taught that when the body stops, awareness disappears. But nothing in your direct experience supports that. In fact, all of your experience points to the opposite. That consciousness resumes, as if it never left. So what if consciousness doesn't shut off? What if it simply shifts? What if it's not the flame that dies, but the lamp that burns out? Not the signal that ends, but the receiver that goes quiet. You cannot know non-existence, because knowing itself is existence. The fear of being gone is rooted in imagination, not reality. You can't fear what you can't touch, and non-being can never be touched. To fear death is to fear a state that can't hold you. So ask yourself, if consciousness has no reference point for absence, can it truly end? Or is it more likely that what you are, this silent, witnessing presence, simply changes focus, just like a dream slipping into another dream, just like waking from sleep into another form of light? Maybe what you call the end is just another beginning you haven't remembered yet. What if I told you that the person you think you are, the one with the name, the memories, the preferences, the fears, isn't really you at all? You've been taught to believe that your mind is your brain, that your thoughts and awareness are nothing more than the accidental byproduct of neurons firing in a specific pattern, and because the brain is physical, the logic follows that when it stops functioning, so does your consciousness. But here's the flaw in that story. It assumes that consciousness is created by the brain, rather than experienced through it. You've mistaken the vessel for the traveler. You've been looking at the mirror and assuming the reflection is the one doing the seeing. But you are not the mirror. You are the awareness looking through it. The brain is a tool, an instrument. It processes information, stores memory, governs the body. But awareness, the raw presence that sees, feels, knows, is something else entirely. Something the brain cannot contain, only participate in. Think about this. Your mind can observe itself. You can step back from a thought and say, "Why am I thinking this?" You can feel a wave of emotion and still remain separate from it, watching it rise, peak, and dissolve. That simple act of observing your own thoughts is a paradox if your mind is nothing but matter. Matter cannot examine itself with detachment. A stone doesn't wonder what it feels like to be heavy. But you can observe the contents of your own mind and remain untouched by them. So who is doing the watching? You might believe that your thoughts define you, that your personality is your identity. But thoughts come and go, beliefs change. Your likes and dislikes shift over time. You once believed things you now laugh at. You once feared things that no longer touch you. And yet, behind all those changes, something has remained constant, the one who noticed the change. You are not the thoughts you think. You are the space in which those thoughts appear. Like clouds drifting through the sky, your thoughts form and fade, but the sky remains. The sky never tries to hold on to the clouds, it simply allows them to pass. In the same way, the real you is not the cloud of mind, but the clear, open presence beneath it. The illusion of a material self keeps you trapped in fear. It convinces you that when the brain dies, you die. But if you were never the brain to begin with, what then truly ends? Not the awareness that watches, not the spaciousness that holds every moment. That part of you, the part that cannot be touched, weighed, or measured, isn't bound by biology. It doesn't age, and it doesn't break, because it was never in the brain. It was simply using it, like a painter using a brush, like a traveler using a vehicle to explore a world it was never fully part of. What if I told you that what you're starting to realize now isn't a new discovery, but a remembering of something ancient, something your soul has always known? Long before modern science tried to reduce consciousness to chemistry, before culture taught you to run from silence and worship distraction, there were those who saw clearly, from the sages of Vedanta to the monks of early Buddhism, from the mystics of Egypt to the philosophers of ancient Greece, the ones who sat quietly with the mystery of death didn't see it as a wall, they saw it as a door. They didn't describe death as a vanishing point, they described it as a return, a movement, not an ending. To them, you were never a body with a soul. You were a soul with a body. The body changed, the form changed, but the essence, the awareness, remained untouched. They saw life not as a single line with a start and a finish, but as a cycle, a rhythm, like waves rising and falling in an infinite ocean. When a wave disappears, it doesn't die, it returns to the sea. So do you. Some called this transition rebirth, others called it liberation. But beneath the names was the same unshakable knowing. Awareness does not fracture. You cannot break what is not made of parts. What you truly are does not scatter when the body falls. It simply shifts, like light passing through a prism into a different color. The essence continues. not because of blind hope, but because it cannot do anything else. That is its nature. And the deeper truth? You already know this. You've always known, that subtle sense inside you, that quiet feeling when you look at the stars, or sit with grief, or feel the pull of something bigger. It's not your imagination, it's memory. A memory older than your name, older than this life. You are not being taught a new truth here, you are being reminded of an old one, a truth that's lived in the heartbeat of humanity since the beginning. Ancient cultures didn't need to prove this with machines or data. They felt it. They lived with death. They didn't hide it or fear it. They honored it. They built temples, chants, and sacred texts around the mystery, not to escape it, but to walk with it, because to them, death was not a stranger. It was a guide. And now, as you peel back the noise of modern fear, you begin to hear that same whisper again. Death is not disappearance, it's transformation. It's not darkness, it's depth. So maybe, just maybe, what you've been calling a question has always been an answer waiting inside you, not to be learned, but to be remembered. What if I told you that everything you think you are, your face, your history, your personality, is just a costume, worn for a while, then set aside? You've watched yourself change over time. Your body is not the same as it was 10 years ago. Your thoughts have evolved. Your beliefs have shifted. Even the sound of your voice and the rhythm of your walk have been shaped and reshaped by time. And yet, despite all of that, there's something in you that hasn't moved, something still, something unchanged. That constant presence has been with you through every version of yourself. It saw your childhood through curious eyes, your teenage years through questions and rebellion, and your adulthood with the weight of memory. And still, it watches. If all of those outer layers have transformed, what has stayed the same? What is the thread that runs through the tapestry of your existence, unbroken? That question alone begins to pull you into something deeper. The answer isn't a thought, a name, or a feeling. It's presence. It's the I that notices every thought without being the thought. The awareness that experiences every emotion without being consumed by it. And that awareness isn't just yours, it is you. Not the character, but the canvas. Imagine watching a movie in a theater. The screen lights up with explosions, heartbreak, love, loss, triumph, and tragedy. Scene after scene flickers across it. But no matter what the story is, no matter how intense the drama or how bright the colors, the screen never burns. It never tears. It never changes. When the movie ends, the screen remains, quiet, still, waiting. That's what you are. You are not the scenes playing out in your life. You are the still, silent field in which they unfold. The mistake you've made is confusing the character for the observer. You've thought you were the story, the thoughts, the roles. You've forgotten that you were the one watching it all happen. You don't need to try to be this presence. It's not something you do, it's what you are. Everything else is temporary. The body ages, the story shifts, the emotions rise and fall like weather. But the sky doesn't move because of the storm. And you are that sky. When you realize that, something softens. The fear of death starts to dissolve, because you begin to see that what ends was never the true you. What dies is the mask, not the one wearing it. The canvas remains, untouched by the paint, eternal, quiet, unchanging. You've been looking for yourself in the reflection. Now you're turning to face the one who's always been doing the seeing. What if I told you that the thing you fear most, the moment of death, is something you'll never actually experience? It sounds strange at first, maybe even impossible, but sit with it. What you call the fear of death is really the fear of being present in your own absence, the fear of witnessing your own vanishing. But think about that. How could you be aware of not being aware? How could you watch yourself disappear? That would require you to still be there, observing. And if you're still observing, then you haven't disappeared at all. It's a trick of the mind, a loop with no exit. The ego, which lives through labels and form, imagines death as its own funeral, watching the lights dim, the breath fade, the world go on without it. But that scene, dramatic as it may be, is fiction. Because what the ego doesn't understand is that death is not something you live through. It's not an experience in the ordinary sense. It's not like pain, or sleep, or fear. It's the absence of experience entirely. and that is something you can never actually touch. The fear of death only exists within the ego, the psychological identity you've built over time. The collection of memories, names, roles, and routines that says, "This is me." That part of you sees death as its ultimate threat, because it cannot imagine a reality in which it doesn't exist. But you are not your ego. You've watched it shift and wobble. You've felt its pride and its shame. You've seen it rise in moments of praise and collapse in moments of rejection. If you can watch it, you are not it. So when the ego trembles at the thought of death, understand that it's not your true self that's afraid. It's the mask. It's the temporary role, terrified of its own final scene. But the stage beneath that role doesn't vanish when the show ends. The actor steps off, but the awareness remains. You start to see it clearly. What dies is the story, not the storyteller. What fades is the form, not the formless presence behind it. The you that fears death is the same you that feared embarrassment as a child, the one that feared not fitting in, the one that clings to control. And yet, even as those fears came and went, something deeper watched silently, untouched. That is who you are, and that part of you cannot fear death, because it has never known separation. Death is not your enemy, it's not a punishment, it's not even a void, it's just the point at which the ego's illusion reaches its limit. Beyond that limit, there is no fear, only space. Only stillness, only the quiet continuation of what was never born and cannot end. When you realize this, you don't just lose your fear of death, you begin to lose your fear of life. What if I told you that everything you've believed about your mind, that it lives inside your head, that it's a product of your brain, might be completely backward? For years, you've been taught that consciousness is created by neurons, that your thoughts, your sense of self, your awareness of the world, are nothing more than electrical impulses bouncing between gray matter. But for all the advancements in neuroscience, for all the machines and scans and studies, science still cannot explain what consciousness is. It can measure brain waves, detect activity, observe patterns, but it cannot locate the thing that knows it is observing. Think about that. If your brain was simply creating consciousness like fire creates heat, then we should be able to see where it starts, how it begins. But no scientist has ever found a switch that turns awareness on. What they find instead is something stranger. Brain activity responds to consciousness, not just the other way around. In near-death experiences, in altered states, even in clinical flatlines, awareness often persists when brain function does not. How can that be? Maybe it's because the brain doesn't produce consciousness at all. Maybe it receives it. Imagine a radio. You turn it on, and music plays. You can adjust the volume, change the station, even break the antenna, but the music isn't coming from inside the radio. The radio is just a receiver, a translator. It tunes into a frequency and brings it into your room. Break the radio, and the music stops playing there, but the signal still exists. It hasn't vanished. You've just lost your way of interpreting it. Now, consider your brain. It may function just like that radio, tuning your consciousness into this reality, this identity, this version of self. But when the brain stops working, it doesn't mean the signal, the consciousness, is gone. It only means this particular channel has gone silent. The awareness that was streaming through it continues, because it was never confined to the instrument in the first place. You can feel this, even if you've never said it out loud. There are moments when you know you are more than your body. When you dream, you live entire worlds without your physical form. When you meditate, there's a vastness behind your thoughts. When you lose track of time, fall into awe, or dissolve into love, you know you're touching something beyond circuitry and synapses. So ask yourself, what if the brain is not your source of awareness, but your gateway? What if consciousness is the ocean, and the brain is just the cup you've been drinking from? When the cup breaks, the water doesn't cease. It simply returns to where it came from. Not lost, not gone, just free. What if I told you that everything you believe makes you you, your name, your career, your memories, your story, is not what survives when you die? These things feel essential. They've shaped your identity. They've guided your choices. But when the body falls away and the story ends, none of these fragments follow you. Not your possessions, not your resume, not even the relationships you swore would define your life. What remains is something far more subtle, something you've always carried but rarely paused to feel, the silent witness. This witness has been with you through everything. It was there before you learned your name. It was there through your first heartbreak, your greatest joy, your quietest sorrow. It doesn't speak in words. It doesn't argue or defend, it simply sees. And though your thoughts change, though your identity reshapes itself again and again, this witnessing presence never wavers. It is the being behind your becoming, the space in which all things rise and fall. And here's the truth. That witness is not bound to a single life. It's not tied to a face in the mirror or a voice in conversation. It is beyond time, beyond personality, beyond even memory. It is not the wave crashing on the surface of the ocean, it is the ocean itself, momentarily shaped into a wave. The wave may dissolve, but the ocean remains. And if you are the ocean, then what dies is not you, only a temporary form you've worn. This is why the deepest traditions never spoke of death as destruction. They spoke of it as movement. Rebirth, not in the sense of simply coming back into another body, but in the deeper understanding that awareness never stops unfolding. It continues, it evolves, it shifts expression. What you are doesn't vanish, it transforms. Just as a flame can leap from one candle to another, the light continues even if the original wick is gone. Death is not annihilation, it's transition. The character you've played steps off the stage, but the actor, the awareness, remains. This actor has taken many roles, worn many names, lived in countless forms, but it has never ceased being aware. That's why you sometimes feel a longing you can't explain, a sense that this life is only one page in a much larger book. Because deep down, something in you remembers what you really are. So what survives death? Not the noise, not the roles, not the mask. What survives is what never began, what never needed a name, what cannot be broken or buried, the quiet center, the witnessing light, the vastness you keep trying to find outside of yourself, when in truth, it's always been inside, unchanging, eternal, and waiting for you to remember. Spirituality. Narrations said, "What if I told you that death is not something that happens to you, but something that happens through you? Not an external collapse, but an internal shift. Not a moment where the world turns its back, but a moment when you finally turn inward. You've been taught to view death as an event, something outside of you, a thing that arrives and takes. But death is not a thief. It is a doorway, and it doesn't open outward into some faraway realm. It opens inward, into the very core of what you've always been. All around you, there are hints that this is true. Near-death experiences tell us stories that defy explanation. People leaving their bodies, floating above operating tables, entering realms of indescribable peace and light, only to return changed forever. Not just physically, but spiritually, shifted from the inside out. They speak not of fear, but of clarity, not of an ending, but of remembering. And even those who haven't stood that close to death often find themselves transformed by mystic revelation or sudden awakening. Something cracks open, the illusion thins, and they feel it. The continuity that was always there, just hidden beneath the noise of identity. If death is the end of something, it's not the end of life. It's the end of form, and forms were never the whole story. Letting go of fear means letting go of the idea that life and death are opposites. They are not. The true opposite of death is birth. Birth begins the experience of being someone, death dissolves it. But life? Life is something bigger. Life is the current of awareness that flows through each of those expressions, the thread that strings together every chapter, every mask, every costume. You are not the mask, you are the light behind the eyes. You've worn so many identities already in this one lifetime. Child, student, sibling, lover, friend, leader, seeker. Some of those identities you grew into, others you outgrew. And each time you shed one, something deeper remained. That shedding is a kind of mini-death, a rehearsal for the larger transition that waits for every one of us. And just like those smaller deaths, the great transition might not be an end, but a return. A return to spaciousness, to presence, to the unfiltered knowing that you are not a role, but a witness playing roles. When you understand this, the fear begins to unravel. You see that death is not the fall of the curtain, It's the silence between songs, the breath between lifetimes. What you are is not trapped in a single scene. Life has been using forms to express itself through you, and death is simply the shift into another expression. The door does not lead to nothing. It leads inward, to the center of your own being, the place that was never born and will never end. What if I told you that immortality isn't about living forever as the person you think you are, but about recognizing that you've never truly not existed? You were never born in the way you've been taught, not as a blank slate suddenly thrust into a world of form, and you won't die the way you fear either, not as a vanishing point or a fading flame. What you truly are isn't subject to those beginnings and endings. You are not inside this story, you are the awareness in which the story unfolds. From the moment you were old enough to understand life and death, you were given a timeline. Birth at one end, death at the other. You were told that you started when you took your first breath, and that you'll end with your last. But that version of you, the body, the personality, the history, isn't the real you. It's a costume made of stardust and memory. What you are came before that first breath, and what you are will remain long after the final exhale. Because what you are was never confined to breath at all. Consciousness doesn't obey the laws of matter. It's not a thing that rises from particles or fades when molecules stop firing. Matter appears within consciousness, not the other way around. Your body changes, your thoughts change, your roles evolve, but the witnessing awareness behind all of it remains untouched. That's the part of you that doesn't age. That's the part of you that doesn't fracture. That's the true definition of immortality, not the survival of the ego, but the unbroken presence that has quietly observed every moment of your life. You've been taught to fear death because you've been taught to identify with what is temporary. But when you realize that your essence was never temporary to begin with, the fear dissolves. Death becomes less of a cliff and more of a threshold, less of an ending and more of a release. You stop clinging to things that fade and begin living from the part of you that doesn't. You stop striving for permanence in the external world, because you remember that permanence is already within you, and then something profound happens. You begin to live, not as a fragile being racing against time, but as a timeless presence dancing through experience. You speak more gently, you love more freely. You fear less, because there's nothing left to lose. You've seen behind the curtain, you've touched what doesn't die. And once you know that you are that presence, that stillness, that space, then even in the face of death, you remain unshaken. Because you were never just passing through this world. You are the space in which it all appears.